Why is my mother's photo in your house? Her voice cracked on the last word. Elena stood in the middle of Domenico Castellano's forbidden study, the room she was never supposed to enter, holding a silver frame with shaking hands, staring at a photograph of her mother laughing in the arms of the most dangerous man in the city, a man she had been cleaning floors for, a man no one questioned, ever. The footsteps behind her stopped. She turned around, and Domenico Castellano, all 6 feet of silence and cold power, looked at the photograph in her hands like he'd been waiting 27 years for someone to find it. Subscribe. Drop your city in the comments. Stay until the end, because this story is just getting started. Elena Reyes had one rule she had tattooed on the inside of her chest the night she took this job, the night she sat across from Mrs. Ruiz in the downstairs parlor and nodded at every instruction like a woman who understood the terms of her employment perfectly. Keep your head down. 11 months, 2 weeks, 4 days. She had kept that rule like it was the only thing standing between her and something she couldn't name. She showed up at 4:45 every morning before the household woke. She moved through the corridors like a shadow. She did not linger. She did not look at things that weren't hers to look at. She did not ask questions about the men who came and went at odd hours, or the conversations that stopped the moment she entered a room, or the way the air inside this mansion felt different from air in every other building she'd ever been inside, heavier loaded, like the house itself was holding a breath it had never let go. She kept her head down because the pay was the only thing standing between her mother and a billing office that had stopped being polite 6 months ago. That was it. That was the whole calculation. Nothing complicated, nothing noble, pure survival mathematics. And then the door to the West Wing study was open. She almost walked past it. She nearly did. Her cart was loaded, her schedule was running 12 minutes late, and the hallway runner had jammed her left wheel twice already, and she was not in the mood. But the light that came through that 2-inch gap, that thin amber line across the dark floor, stopped her foot mid-step in a way she couldn't explain later. Like a hand on her shoulder. Like a warning or an invitation, and she couldn't tell which. She had passed that door 5 days a week for 11 months. Locked. Always locked. Not on her chart. Not her business. Mrs. Ruiz on day 1. That room is not yours. Do you understand me? Said the way you say things you only intend to say once. Elena had understood. The door was open. She told herself she was checking for a draft. An open window, maybe something that needed to be reported, a practical reason to push the door just wide enough to look inside. She was not being reckless. She was being thorough. It was part of the job. She pushed the door. The smell hit her first old leather and paper and the ghost of cigar smoke from years ago that had never fully left the walls. Books floor to ceiling, a desk built like a fortress in the center of the room, and photographs. Everywhere. On the shelves, between the books, in silver frames and wooden ones, and some just propped casually against hardback spines like they were nothing, like they didn't matter. Elena was not looking at the photographs. She was already constructing her explanation for Mrs. Ruiz. The door was ajar. I was concerned about the window. I stepped in only for a moment when the edge of her vision snagged on something familiar. She turned her head. And her brain understood before her eyes finished processing the way it happens sometimes with faces you've known your whole life. Her mother was 20 years younger in the photograph. Maybe 25. Her hair long and loose, her head thrown back in a full-body laugh, the kind of laugh Elena had seen maybe a dozen times in 32 years, because Carmen Reyes did not laugh like that, had not laughed like that since before Elena could remember, had always carried something heavy and unnamed in the center of her chest, that made complete joy seem just slightly out of reach. And the man beside her had his arm around her shoulders. And he was not looking at the camera. He was looking at Carmen like she was something irreplaceable. Like she was the only thing in the room worth looking at. Domenico Castellano. Elena's hand moved before she decided to move it. Her fingers closed around the frame and lifted it from the shelf, and she stood there in the forbidden study holding this impossible thing, and the only sound was her own breathing, coming faster now. In the single sentence her brain kept repeating on a loop, "That's my mother. That's my mother. That is my mother. Why is my mother's photo in your house?" She said it to the room. She said it to herself. She said it because some part of her needed to hear the question out loud to confirm that she was awake, that this was real, that the photograph in her hands was not some strange trick of light or exhaustion. "That," said a voice from the doorway directly behind her, "is a very long answer." The frame nearly hit the floor. She spun around and caught it against her chest and pressed it there like a shield. And Domenico Castellano stood in the doorway of his own study with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled and a glass of dark amber in his right hand, watching her with the particular stillness of a man who has been completely unsurprised by something he has been waiting for. "I was the door." Her mouth was moving without input from her brain. "I thought there was a window. It wasn't. I'm so sorry, Mr. Castellano. I'll just. Elena." One word, her name clean and quiet. And the way he said it, not the way he'd say any other name, not the practiced neutrality of an employer addressing invisible staff, stopped her completely. "How do you know my name?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "I know all of my staff." "You've never spoken to me, not once in 11 months. "No," he agreed without apology. "I haven't." He came into the room then, and she stepped back one reflexive step until the edge of the desk caught the back of her thighs. He stopped a few feet away and looked at the frame she was still clutching to her chest. "May I?" He held out his hand. She didn't want to let go. Every instinct she had said, "Hold on," as if the photograph was evidence, and she was in a trial she didn't know she was standing in. But she loosened her grip and let him take it. He looked at it for a long moment. "Her name was Carmen," he said. "Was. Her name is Carmen." The sharpness in her voice surprised even her. "She's alive. She's my mother." He looked up, and in the fraction of a second before his expression settled back into control, she saw something move behind his eyes, something that looked impossibly like 27 years of relief compressing itself into a single exhale. "I know," he said. "I know she's alive." "Then don't talk about her like she isn't." Elena took a breath. Her hands had stopped shaking. Something cold and clear had moved in and taken the place of panic the way it sometimes does when the shock becomes too large for fear to contain. "Tell me who you are to her, right now, because she never mentioned your name. Not once. In 32 years, your name has never come out of her mouth." "I know that too." "So explain it." A beat. "Explain the photograph." He set the frame on the desk, not back on the shelf on the desk, face up between them, where they could both see it, and looked at her with the steady, unflinching attention of a man who has rehearsed this moment and has decided to stop rehearsing. "What do you think you're looking at?" he asked. "I think I'm looking at something my mother never wanted me to find." She held his gaze. "I think I'm looking at something that changes things." One more breath dragged in slow. "I think you need to tell me right now that you're not my father." The silence that followed was the loudest thing she'd ever stood inside. "Elena, tell me I'm wrong." Her voice fractured on the last word. "Just barely. Just enough to reveal the 26-year-old wound underneath. Please. Tell me I'm wrong, and I'll walk out of this room and we never have to speak about this again." Domenico Castellano looked at his daughter across a mahogany desk in a room she was never supposed to enter, and he did not tell her she was wrong. "Sit down," he said quietly. "I don't want to sit down." "Sit down anyway." Her legs made the decision for her. They stopped holding properly, and she was in the leather chair before she'd registered moving, gripping the armrest, jaw locked so tight it ached. He sat across from her, and for one vertiginous second it looked exactly like the interview the downstairs parlor, Mrs. Ruiz and her clipboard Elena nodding at the terms. And the realization hit her then, not slowly, but all at once, a wave she had no time to brace against. "This wasn't a coincidence," she said. "I didn't find this job. This job found me." He said nothing. "You hired me." The word came out like an accusation because it was one. "You knew exactly who I was before I walked through your front door." "Yes." "You've known this whole time, every day for 11 months. "Yes." "And you never said a word." The anger arrived clean and necessary, cutting through the shock like something she'd been waiting for without knowing it. "I have been invisible to you. I cleaned your floors. I pressed your clothes. I polished cutlery in this house for nearly a year while you knew who I was, and you chose. I wasn't ready." The words landed flat and exposed, and he did not dress them up. "You weren't ready." A sound came out of her that wasn't quite a laugh. I grew up without a father. My mother worked doubles at a laundromat until her hands bled. I dropped out of my second year of college because she got sick and someone had to be there. I've been cleaning your house because her medical bills, she pressed her hand over her mouth, breathed, lowered it, and you weren't ready. He sat with that. He didn't deflect it or minimize it or offer her the mercy of an excuse. He let it land where it landed, and somehow his silence was the most honest thing he'd given her yet. Why did she leave? Elena asked. If that photograph is real, if what I see in it is real, why did she leave? She didn't. His voice was even, but underneath it was something old and unstitched. I made her go. Wipe it. Because the alternative, he said, was a coffin. The room went absolutely still. Elena looked at him. What I was building when your mother and I were together, he said carefully, was not something that came without enemies. And those enemies at that time had a very specific strategy. They went after what mattered to the people they wanted to destroy. Your mother is a good woman. She was completely outside of my world. She had nothing to do with any of it. He paused, and that made her a perfect target. He folded his hands on the desk. So I did the only thing that would make her untouchable. I made her believe there was nothing between us worth coming for. You broke her heart, Elena said. Flat, factual. Yes. On purpose. Yes. And then you disappeared from her life and let her think it was real. Yes. A beat. That was the point. Elena sat with that. She thought about her mother's face, not the laughing face in the photograph, but the face she knew, the one that smiled just slightly too carefully, that deflected certain questions with a tired redirect, that had always held something sealed behind the eyes that Elena had never been able to reach, no matter how many times she'd knocked. She had assumed her father was simply a man who hadn't stayed. She had built her entire understanding of her own origin story at around that assumption. And now the building was coming down. You've been watching her, Elena said, not a question, for 27 years. The laundromat job, a slight nod. The insurance adjustment 3 years ago. That wasn't a clerical error. No, something cold spread through her chest. The scholarship I was considered for in my second year, before she got sick. You would have received it, he said quietly. The timing was unfortunate. Elena stood up, not out of anger this time, out of the need to not be sitting while the ground reshaped itself beneath her. She walked to the window, stared at the dark garden below without seeing it. You've been running her life, she said to the glass. You've been pulling strings she didn't know were there. I've been keeping her alive. He let a beat pass. There's a difference, Elena. I know you don't see it that way right now, but there is a difference. She turned back to him. Why bring me here? Why this? Why the job? Why now after all this time? What changed? He was quiet for a moment, and then 3 weeks ago, one of my men saw a car parked outside your mother's building. A car that had no reason to be there. The man inside was taking photographs. The back of her neck prickled. Of her window, he said. Who? The word came out barely above a whisper. People who have recently discovered that your mother did not vanish as completely as I had arranged. People who have connected her to me. He held her gaze. People who now know about you. Elena's stomach dropped through the floor. Where is my mother? Her voice was a blade. Right now. Where is she? She is not in her apartment. Where is she? She hasn't been in her apartment for 8 days. She is somewhere safe, somewhere I control. He opened the desk drawer, set a phone on the surface between them. Call her. The phone rang twice. Elena, her mother's voice, quiet and careful and real. And Elena closed her eyes for 1 second and just breathed. Mama, are you okay? Are you? I'm all right, mija. A long pause, the kind that holds whole sentences inside it. Are you? Did he? Another pause. He told you. Not a question. The voice of a woman who had been waiting for a door to open for 27 years and could hear it happening through a phone line. He finally told you. He told me. Elena kept her eyes on Domenico across the desk. He was watching her, not crowding, not hovering, watching with the quiet attention of a man standing at the far end of a moment he could not control. Mama, I need to know you're safe. Tell me you're safe. I'm safe, a breath, and then in a voice stripped of everything except the truth it had been carrying too long. He's a complicated man, Elena. I know what you must be feeling right now. I know. But in the ways that mattered, her mother stopped. Started again. In the ways that mattered most, he never lied to me. Elena ended the call, set the phone on the desk, looked at her father. Outside, somewhere deep in the house, a door opened and closed. The mansion breathed around them, keeping its vigil, holding its years of buried things. There is more, Domenico said. What I've told you is only the beginning. The people who are looking for your mother, for you, they are not patient people, and they are closer than I would like. How close? He didn't answer that immediately. He stood, walked to the bookshelf, stood with his back to her for a moment, and when he turned around, his face had shifted, not softer exactly, but different. The armor adjusted for a different kind of fight. There is a name, he said, a man. He was my closest ally 28 years ago. He knew your mother. He knew what she meant to me. He paused. He is the one who sent the man with the camera. Why Pam? Because he wants something I have, and he has decided that the most efficient way to get it, he looked at her steadily, is through you. Elena stared at him. He doesn't know you've hired me, she said slowly. He doesn't know I'm already inside this house. Something shifted in Domenico's expression. Barely visible, but it was there. No, he said, he doesn't. The silence between them rearranged itself into something neither of them had named yet, something that felt against all logic, against everything she knew and didn't know, and had just had stripped away from her like the beginning of an alliance. Elena Reyes looked at the man who had been her employer for 11 months and her father for 27 years and a stranger for 32, and she pulled the chair back to the desk and sat down. Then we need to talk about that, she said. Tell me everything. All of it. From the beginning. A beat. And don't leave anything out this time. Domenico Castellano sat across from his daughter, set his glass to the side, and opened the door he had kept locked far too long. Outside, the night pressed close against the windows. And somewhere in the city, a man who knew Domenico's oldest secret was already moving. Domenico began the way men begin, when they've rehearsed something so many times it's worn smooth carefully from a distance, with the facts arranged in the order least likely to detonate the room. Elena let him talk. She sat across from him in the leather chair, with her hands in her lap and her back straight, and she listened the way she'd learned to listen in this house, without moving, without reacting, taking everything in and processing it somewhere internal where no one could see the damage it was doing. It was the same skill she'd used for 11 months when men in good suits said things in hallways that she was not supposed to have heard. You go still. You take it in. You sort it later. He started with how they met, a place she didn't know, a night that was 27 years ago, a version of himself he described with the particular flatness of someone who has made peace with who they were by being very clear-eyed about it. He was 30 years old. He was building something. He was not a good man by most definitions, but he was not yet the full weight of what he would become, and there was a period, brief, maybe 8 months, when he had allowed himself to believe that the life he was constructing could contain something ordinary inside it. Something clean. That was Carmen. She wasn't supposed to be at that particular gathering, he said. She was there with someone else, a friend, a cousin, someone peripheral. She stayed because she liked the music. He paused. She told me later she thought I was someone's driver. Were you? Elena asked. I was driving myself that night, he said, which she found very funny when I told her. Elena looked at her hands. She was trying to fit this, a young Carmen, laughing at a man she mistook for hired help, into the architecture of everything she knew about her mother, and it fit. That was the thing, it fit perfectly. Carmen had always found that kind of accidental deflation of powerful men privately hilarious. She'd passed that quality on without naming it. How long were you together? Elena asked. 8 months before I understood the risk. 3 more before I accepted what I had to do about it. His voice didn't waver, but there was a texture to it that hadn't been there when he was talking about business and ledgers and Raphael. Something older, something that hadn't been resolved by time the way he'd wanted it to be. 11 months total, then I ended it. And she didn't know why. She knew what I told her, which was that it had been a mistake, that I wasn't the kind of man who stayed. He paused. I chose the words specifically, words that would make her angry rather than hopeful. Angry people don't wait for you to come back. Elena absorbed that, and she was already pregnant when you ended it. I didn't know, he said. The words came out with a kind of stripped, absolute certainty. I want to be very clear about that. I did not know about you until you were 4 years old. How did you find out? Someone told me. A mutual contact peripheral is someone who'd known Carmen briefly during the time we were together. He mentioned it in passing, not even as relevant information, just as news, the way people mention things they don't know are going to hit like a collision. He looked at his hands. I pulled a car over on the side of a road and sat there for 45 minutes. Elena looked at him. And then I found her. Carefully, without her knowing. I needed to see. He stopped, started again. I needed to understand what kind of life she was living. Whether she was safe. Whether, he exhaled, whether you were real. Was I? Elena said flatly. Something crossed his face that she didn't have a name for yet. You were 4 years old and you were in a park with your mother and you were arguing about a yellow bucket, he said. You wanted it back from another child. You were very committed to the position. Elena said nothing. You had her eyes, he said, but you were arguing the way I argue, which is to say without any willingness to consider the alternative. A pause. I sat in a car across the street and watched for 11 minutes and then I drove away and I didn't come back. Because it was safer not to. Because if I came back, he said, I would have stayed. And staying at that point in my life would have gotten both of you killed within 18 months. He said it without self-pity, which was somehow the hardest version to sit with. Not a man excusing himself, a man reporting a calculation. The people I was dealing with then, the organization I was dismantling from the inside, the enemies I was accumulating in the process, they had a methodology. They went after what you loved. It wasn't personal. It was just efficient. He looked at her. I could not be someone who loved you visibly. So you loved us invisibly, Elena said, for 27 years. I did what I could do from the distance that was safe. The laundromat job, the insurance, the scholarship. She listed them quietly, not as accusations this time, as an accounting, as an attempt to understand the shape of something she'd lived inside without knowing its dimensions. Yes. Is there more things I don't know about? He was quiet for a moment. Your first apartment, when you moved out at 22, the building had a waiting list of 8 months. The vacancy opened in 3 weeks. Elena closed her eyes briefly. The hospital, she said, 3 years ago, when my mother had her first episode, I waited 6 hours alone in that waiting room. She opened her eyes. Were you there? The pause before he answered told her everything. You were in the 3rd floor corridor, he said quietly. Green jacket. You had a coffee you weren't drinking. A beat. I was in the parking structure. I had 2 people inside the hospital to ensure she received adequate care and appropriate attention. He held her gaze. You were not alone, Elena. You didn't know you weren't alone, which I understand is not the same thing. But you were not alone. Something broke open very quietly in the center of Elena's chest. She pressed her lips together and breathed through her nose and did not let it become more than that because there wasn't room for it to become more than that yet. Later, she'd put it somewhere and deal with it later. You said earlier that things had changed, she said, steadying her voice. That something made this more urgent. You told me Raphael's people were watching her building 3 weeks ago. She looked at him. But you've been watching her for 27 years. What changed 3 weeks ago specifically? What was different about that car outside her building? Domenico leaned back slightly. The shift was small, but she noticed it, the recalibration of a man deciding how much of the next layer to reveal and in what order. She'd gotten good enough at reading him in the last 2 hours to catch it now, and she decided to name it. Don't, she said, don't organize what you tell me. Don't decide what I can handle. I've been handling things alone since I was 19 years old. I have a higher tolerance for difficult information than you're giving me credit for. He looked at her, and then he said, the man in the car worked for someone named Rafael Mora. He said the name the way you say something that has weight. She filed it. Who is he? My former partner. A pause. My former closest ally. Another pause, and this one carried something in it that the others hadn't. something that was still, after all these years, not entirely processed. In the most dangerous man I have ever personally underestimated. What does he want? He wants something I have, something that, if used correctly, would dismantle everything he's spent the last 20 years building. Domenico's voice went very even. And he has recently concluded that the most direct route to getting it from me is through the two people he now knows I cannot afford to lose. The room went very quiet. He knows about me, Elena said. He knows you exist. He's known for some time, I believe, longer than I realize, which is its own failure I'm still working through. His jaw tightened slightly. The surveillance on your mother's building was not him beginning to look. It was him confirming what he'd already found. Elena stood up, not from agitation, from the need to think on her feet, literally the way she'd always processed the hardest information. She walked 3 steps toward the window and 3 steps back and turned to face him. You brought me into this house, she said. You hired me, set it all up, and the reason you did it now, 11 months ago, was because you already knew Raphael was getting closer. Domenico didn't flinch from it. Yes, you put me inside your protection without telling me I needed it. I put you in the safest place I could control without revealing information that would have what? Her voice didn't rise, but the edge in it sharpened. Would have given me the ability to make my own choices. Would have told me what kind of danger my mother was in so that I could have an actual conversation with her about it instead of watching her carry it alone. She stopped herself, breathed. You made another decision about what we could handle without asking us. Yes, he said again. Just that. No defense. She looked at him for a long moment. How old was I when you decided you'd be good at this, at making decisions for us from the outside? 27 years old, he said quietly. The same age I always am inside all of this, the night I drove away from that park. That landed differently than she expected. She sat back down. Tell me about this thing he wants, she said. This thing you have. Tell me what it is and why it matters, and why you haven't already used it if it's as significant as you're making it sound. He looked at her steadily. This was the moment, she could feel it, where the conversation moved from history into the present tense, from the story of what had happened into the machinery of what was happening right now tonight in real time. He knew it too. She could see him arriving at the decision the same moment she was watching for it. There is a ledger, he said, and the door opened, not metaphorically. The actual door of the study opened without a knock, and Mrs. Ruiz, solid, unflappable. Mrs. Ruiz, who had been running this household with the precision of a military operation for longer than Elena had been alive, stood in the doorway with her face arranged into the expression of a woman delivering news she has already decided how to deliver. There's a car outside, she said to Domenico. Front gate, engine running, no plates. Elena watched Domenico's face do something very fast and very contained. How long? 12 minutes. My man at the gate says it hasn't moved. Occupants. Driver, 1 passenger rear seat. Domenico stood. Wake Marco. Tell him the study, 5 minutes. He looked at Mrs. Ruiz. And kill the exterior lights on the west side. All of them. Mrs. Ruiz left without a word. Domenico looked at Elena. I need you to stay in this room. Is that Raphael's car? I don't know yet. Then I'll stay in this room, she said. But when Marco gets here, I want to be part of that conversation. He looked like he was going to object. She held his gaze with the particular stillness she'd been practicing all night, and he closed the objection before it fully formed. 5 minutes, he said, and left. Elena sat alone in the study for the first time since she'd walked into it, holding a silver frame with shaking hands. And she looked around the room with different eyes than the ones she'd walked in with. The photographs on the shelves. The books that weren't decoration but weren't quite a library either. Reference material, operational histories, things you keep because they're useful. The desk that was built to hold the weight of serious decisions. She stood up and went to the shelf. She looked at the photographs she hadn't examined when she'd first come in. There were more than she'd registered initially. Some of people she didn't recognize, men in groups formal and informal spanning what looked like several decades. Some of places. One near the end of the shelf in a smaller frame than the others, almost hidden behind a thicker book, a child. A girl, maybe 6 or 7, dark hair in a park, holding a yellow bucket. Elena's hand went to it before she could stop herself. She picked it up. She was looking at herself at age 4, maybe 5. The memory was imprecise in a park she still remembered because it was 3 blocks from their apartment, and she and her mother had gone every Saturday until Carmen's knees started making the walk difficult. And she was grinning in this photograph with the specific, uncomplicated joy of a child who has recently won an argument about a yellow bucket. He had kept this. He had kept this in his study on his shelf, almost hidden, but not entirely hidden for 27 years. Elena set the frame back very carefully. Her hands were not entirely steady. Marco arrived in 4 minutes. He came in fast, already alert, the sleepiness of being woken at midnight nowhere visible on his face. He looked at Elena with the same contained wariness he'd used the first time, and then looked at Domenico, who came in 30 seconds behind him. "Plates are clean," Marco said immediately, meaning manufactured. Someone spent money to make that vehicle look untraceable from a standard check. He set a phone on the desk with a photograph on the screen, grainy exterior camera, a dark car at the gate. The passenger in the rear seat made a call 6 minutes ago, 11 seconds long. The frequency matched one of Raphael's secondary networks. The name again. Raphael. Elena filed the confirmation alongside everything else. "He's announcing himself," Domenico said. It wasn't a question. "He's checking that we're home," Marco said. "The car's not here for action tonight. You don't send a car with visible occupants if you want action. You send it so the person inside can confirm the lights are on." He paused. "He's verifying positions before he moves." "Moving when?" Domenico said. "If the surveillance on Carmen's building started 3 weeks ago, and tonight is the first direct contact, even indirect contact." Marco calculated visibly. "He's close, days not weeks." Elena looked at Domenico. "The safe house where my mother is. Does Raphael know the location?" "No," Domenico said. Then, with the precision of a man who has learned the cost of overconfidence, "He doesn't know the location yet." "Yet," she repeated. "Yet," he confirmed. "Then we need to move her again." Elena said it like it was obvious because it was. If he's confirming positions tonight, he's building toward a move in the next 72 hours. My mother cannot be in the same location she's been in for 8 days when he makes it. Marco looked at Domenico. Something in the look acknowledged that she was right. "There's a second location," Marco said. "Smaller, tighter, 2 of our most reliable people on it." He paused. "I'll call it in." "Do it now," Elena said. "Before the car at the gate leaves and someone reports back." Marco picked up his phone and walked to the far side of the room. Domenico looked at his daughter. Elena looked back at her father, and in the 2 seconds of quiet between Marco's exit from one side of the conversation and his re-entry into it, something moved between them that didn't require words, the specific, uncomfortable recognition of 2 people who are more alike than either of them has had enough time to adjust to. "You were going to tell me about the ledger," Elena said quietly. "I was," he said. "Tell me now, before Marco gets back and this becomes operational. Tell me what it is and what it contains and why Raphael wants it badly enough to put a car outside your gate at midnight." Domenico picked up the glass he'd set aside an hour ago, looked at it, set it back down without drinking. 22 years ago, Raphael began building a secondary network, he said, separate from ours. Invisible to me at the time because I was managing other priorities and because he was by then extremely good at maintaining appearances. His voice was even and controlled, and underneath it was the very specific quality of a man who has gone over a betrayal enough times to have stripped it of its emotional charge without being able to strip it of its weight. The network went deep, municipal level, judicial, administrative, people in positions that make investigation nearly impossible when those same people are the ones who would have to initiate it. He looked at Elena. The ledger documents all of it. Names, amounts, dates, arrangements. 22 years of it. Irrefutable. How did you get it? 6 years ago, Raphael made a mistake. Not a careless one, he's not careless. But he trusted a man one level above where trust was warranted, and that man came to me. He paused. The ledger was his insurance. He gave it to me for safekeeping because he understood that if Raphael knew he had it, he wouldn't survive the month. With it in my hands, he had leverage. He survived 3 more years before he didn't. And now you have it, Elena said, and Raphael wants it back, and the people whose names are in it would be finished, Domenico said simply, their careers, their freedom, their carefully constructed lives, all of it. He met her eyes. The ledger is not just leverage over Raphael. It is leverage over an entire architecture of corruption that has been operating in this city for 2 decades. Which is why I haven't simply handed it to the relevant authorities. Because some of those authorities are in it, Elena said. Because I needed to identify which ones first, he said. And I have been doing that carefully for the past 6 years, building a case for the correct people, people who are not in that ledger. He paused. I was almost ready. Another month, maybe 2. And Raphael found out you were moving. He found out I was repositioning it, he said, internally. A transfer within my own organization for security reasons. But to Raphael, repositioning means preparation. And preparation means he's running out of time to act first. He looked toward the window where outside somewhere a car with no plates sat at his gate, confirming that the lights were on. Tonight is him telling me he knows that. Tonight is him starting his clock. Elena absorbed the full shape of it for the first time. Not just her mother, not just herself. The ledger, the names in it, the 6 years of careful construction that was now in a race against a man who had decided to accelerate. And in the middle of all of it, Carmen Reyes, a woman who had walked away from all of this 27 years ago and had still ended up in a safe house with her window watched because the world her daughter's father had built was too large to stay outside of forever. She never had a choice, Elena said quietly. Did she? My mother. She thought she was out of it. She thought the distance was real. She looked at Domenico, but she was always inside it. She just didn't know. No, he said. She didn't have a choice. That's the part I can't resolve. I made her unsafe by loving her, and I didn't make her safe by leaving. I just made her unaware. He said it with the precise, unsparing clarity of a man who has arrived at an honest accounting after a very long time. That's the thing I have to answer for, not the decisions I made to protect her. The fact that she never had the information she needed to protect herself. The quiet between them was different this time, heavier and more honest, and in some way she couldn't fully articulate yet, the closest thing to real that the conversation had produced all night. Marco came back in. The transfer is set, he said. Carmen moves to the secondary location in the next 30 minutes. He looked at Elena. She'll be told it's a precaution, not told about the car outside. Tell her about the car, Elena said immediately. Both men looked at her. She is a grown woman who has been managing dangerous information for 27 years, Elena said. Tell her the truth. She can handle it. I promise you, she can handle it, and she will make better decisions if she has it than if she doesn't. She looked at Domenico deliberately. That's a lesson someone in this room could stand to apply more broadly. A beat. Tell her, Domenico said to Marco, everything that's relevant. Marco nodded and turned back to his phone. The car at the gate, Elena said. Is it still there? Left 4 minutes ago, Marco said without looking up. But they have what they came for, she said. They know we're here. They know we're active. She looked at Domenico, which means the next move is Raphael's and it's coming fast. Yes, Domenico said. Then we need to stop reacting to his timing and start setting our own. She pulled the chair back to the desk. Not the visitor's chair this time, she moved it around the side, angling it so she was neither across from Domenico nor beside him, but somewhere in between, which felt accurate to what this night had made them. Tell me every access point Raphael might use. Tell me who in your network he might try to turn. Tell me where the ledger actually is right now. She looked at her father. And this time, don't edit it. Domenico looked at her for a moment, at the woman his daughter had become without him, in an apartment with a single window facing a brick wall, and a painting of the ocean hung above it on double shifts and medical bills in the particular fiber of a person who has been strong for so long, they've forgotten it's optional. He pulled his own chair to the same side of the desk, and he told her everything. They were still talking when Marco's phone rang 40 minutes later, with the news that the secondary safe house had confirmed Carmen's arrival. Safe, relocated, informed. And Marco relayed this last part with something in his voice that might have been amusement if the situation had been anything other than what it was, apparently asking a great many very specific questions about the operational security of the location, which the person on the other end of the call had found considerably more thorough than expected from a woman who was described as a laundromat worker from South Glendale. Elena looked at Domenico when Marco finished relaying that. She knows, Elena said. She's always known more than she let on, about all of it. Yes, Domenico said. The word carried 27 years in it. I know. She protected you, Elena said. Even after you left, even after you made her believe it meant nothing. She kept your secrets without being asked to. He was quiet. That's the part you owe her the most for, Elena said. Not the love, not even the leaving. The fact that she chose alone every day for 27 years to keep something she could have destroyed you with and never used it. She held his gaze. She protected you even when you weren't protecting her. Remember that when you talk to her. Domenico looked at his daughter and said nothing because there was nothing to say to that. It was simply true. And the truth of it sat between them in that study in the room that was never supposed to open, like the last thing that needed to be named before the real work could begin. Outside the city moved through its ordinary hours unaware, and somewhere across it, Rafael Mora's clock was already running. Domenico had been talking for 40 minutes by the time the name finally came out. Not easing into it, not softening the edges, just dropping it on the desk between them like a stone. Rafael Mora. Elena watched his face when he said it. Even Domenico, a man who had spent 30 years making sure his face gave nothing away for free, went somewhere else for just a second when that name left his mouth. Somewhere older, somewhere that still had open wounds. He was my partner, Domenico said. Before partner meant anything complicated. We built the same thing together, came up through the same streets, made the same enemies early on, so we'd have fewer later. I trusted him the way you trust someone when you're young enough to think trust is something you earn once and keep forever. He paused. I was wrong. What did he do, Trisha much? 28 years ago, there was a deal, a significant one. The kind that repositions everything, who answers to who controls what, where the lines get drawn for the next decade. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Raphael decided he wanted the whole thing for himself. He went to the other side, fed them information that got 3 of my men killed and nearly got me killed. A beat. He didn't know about your mother. At the time, I thought that was luck. I know now it was because I'd been careful enough early enough that she wasn't findable. He looked at Elena steadily. Until recently. What changed recently? He's been building again. Quietly. Patiently. Raphael has always been patient. It's the most dangerous thing about him. Domenico's voice carried a particular edge when he said it, the kind you develop for people who taught you a lesson you didn't want to learn. He tracked back through old records, found a name, found an address in South Glendale. A pause that landed like weight. Found a daughter. Elena absorbed that. He knows my name. He knows you exist. Whether he has your name yet, that's what I'm working to determine. And what does he want? What is this actually about? You said he wants something you have. Domenico was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that isn't hesitation, it's selection. Choosing how much truth to hand over and in what order. There is a ledger, he said. Physical, not digital. Names, transactions, arrangements going back 22 years. It documents everything Raphael built after he left my organization, every connection, every dirty agreement, every person he owns in this city. Judges, officials, men in positions that would make your stomach turn. He looked at her. He wants it back. You have it. I've had it for 6 years. It came to me through channels I won't bore you with. But the point is, with that ledger, Rafael Mora is untouchable. Without it, he is a man with a great deal of exposure and a great deal of motive to eliminate anyone who might help me use it. And that's us, Elena said. My mother and me. Your mother because of what she knew about me or what Raphael suspects she might know. You, he stopped. Say it. You because you're leverage. The most effective kind. His voice didn't waver, but something in it shifted. A daughter is leverage, Elena. I should have considered that before I brought you into this house. I thought the arrangement was clean. I thought I'd been careful. He said the last word like it tasted wrong. I underestimated how much ground Raphael had covered while I was watching your mother instead of watching him. The silence lasted maybe 5 seconds. Then the door opened without a knock. Elena turned fast. A man stood in the doorway, late 30s, dark jacket, a face built for saying nothing and meaning everything. He looked at Domenico and then at Elena and then back at Domenico with an expression that said he had questions he wasn't going to ask out loud. Marco, Domenico's voice was flat. Come in. Marco Reyes, and yes, Elena clocked the last name immediately, the same name her mother had given her. The name that now felt like either a coincidence or something else entirely came into the room and stopped 2 feet inside the door. He did not sit down. He did not offer Elena a greeting. She knows, Marco said to Domenico, not a question. She found the photograph. A muscle in Marco's jaw moved. He looked at Elena directly for the first time. How much did you tell her? Enough to start, Domenico said. Marco, I know who she is. Marco's voice was not unkind exactly, but it had the controlled flatness of someone managing multiple calculations at once. I've known who she was since she started working here. He looked at Elena. You have your mother's eyes. Everyone keeps telling me things they apparently knew about me for a very long time, Elena said. It's starting to get old. Something flickered across Marco's face, not quite a smile. An acknowledgement maybe that she had every right to be sharp about it. Raphael's man didn't just take photographs, Marco said, turning back to Domenico. He reached into his jacket and placed a folded paper on the desk. He made contact. 30 minutes ago, one of our people intercepted a message. A drop old method physical. He nodded at the paper. Read it. Domenico opened it. Elena watched his face. She'd gotten better at reading it in the last 2 hours than she had in 11 months. The slight tightening around the eyes, the almost invisible shift in the set of his mouth. She saw both and her stomach pulled tight before he'd said a single word. What does it say? She asked. He looked up from the paper and at Marco. Something passed between them, the wordless exchange of 2 men who have stood in enough bad rooms together to communicate in shorthand. It's an offer, Domenico said finally. An offer for what? The ledger. In exchange for... He paused, just long enough that Elena felt the pause like a hand around her throat before he finished the sentence. In exchange for your mother's safety. The room went perfectly still. He has her, Elena said, flat, hollow. You told me she was safe. You told me she was. Marco's voice came in fast. She was in the location we arranged. As of 6 hours ago, she was confirmed safe. Something changed in the last... Something changed. Elena stood up and the chair scraped back hard. You said she was somewhere you controlled. You said, Elena. Domenico's voice was sharp enough to cut through the spiral. Not harsh, precise. The way you speak to someone who is about to make a decision from panic rather than judgment. Listen to me. Tell me she's alive. We don't have confirmation either way yet. That is the truth and I will not lie to you. But Raphael needs her alive to have anything to negotiate with. If he wanted her dead, there would be no message. His eyes didn't leave hers. She is alive. He needs her breathing to get what he wants. And what he wants is the ledger. Yes. So give it to him. The words came out before she'd fully thought them through, raw and immediate and completely reasonable to her in that moment. If it gets my mother back, give it to him. Whatever it is, whatever it costs. If I give Raphael more of that ledger, Domenico said quietly, the first thing he does is eliminate every person who could ever testify to what's in it. Your mother, you, everyone in this room. He let a beat of silence make the point for him. The ledger is the only reason he hasn't moved against us directly yet. The moment it's in his hands, we lose the only thing keeping us all alive. Elena pressed both hands flat on the desk, breathed, made herself think instead of feel, which was possibly the hardest thing she'd done in a day that had already contained several contenders for that title. Then what do we do? She asked. Domenico looked at Marco. Marco looked at Elena. And then Marco said something she hadn't expected in a tone that suggested he'd been holding it for longer than tonight. We use what he doesn't know. What doesn't he know? Elena said. Marco pulled the chair out across from her and sat down the first time he'd moved from the door, and when he leaned forward with his forearms on the desk, he looked at her like he was recalculating something he had already calculated several times before. He doesn't know you're here, Marco said, in this house. He knows Domenico has a daughter, he found that much. But he doesn't know you're already inside. He doesn't know you have made contact. He sent that message because he thinks he can use your mother to pull Domenico into the open. A pause. He doesn't know Domenico already has the one thing worth more than the ledger. Elena stared at him. And what is that? You. Marco said it simply. You are the one thing Raphael didn't account for. He looked for leverage and he found it, except the leverage walked herself into this house 11 months ago and has been learning every hallway, every schedule, every face that comes through that front door. He looked at her steadily. You know things about the operations of this house that took our own people years to learn. You know who comes when. You know which doors open on which days. You've been invisible in here in a way none of us can replicate. You want to use me, Elena said. I want to give you a choice, Marco said, which is more than this situation came with. What choice? We reach back to Raphael. We tell him the exchange has agreed the ledger for Carmen, but we control the meeting, the location, the timing, the terms. He looked at Domenico, then back at her. And you are the variable he won't see coming. Elena looked at Domenico. Is this your plan or his? It became both of ours about 30 seconds ago, Domenico said. How long have you been planning to use me as some kind of... I have been planning, Domenico said carefully, to keep you both alive. The method is adapting to the situation. A beat. Which is what you do when the situation moves faster than the plan. My mother is in Raphael Mora's hands because of this situation. Her voice went quiet and precise in the way voices go when anger gets too large to be loud. She is there because you brought me into this house without telling me why. Because you made decisions about my life, about her life, without asking either of us. And now you're asking me to make another decision based on incomplete information in a crisis you created to clean up a mess that started before I was born. Nobody said anything. So yes, Elena continued, and she looked at Marco directly. Then at Domenico, and her voice did not shake, not once, not even slightly, because she had run out of shock and run out of fear, and what was left underneath both of them was something much harder. I'll help. I'll do whatever needs to be done to get my mother back. But understand something. She looked at her father. The moment she is safe, you and I are going to sit back down in this room, and you are going to tell me everything. About the version you decided I was ready for. Everything. And from that point forward, nothing about my life or my mother's life gets decided without us in the room. Are we clear? Domenico held her gaze for a long moment. Then he said, you negotiate like someone who's been at this table before. I negotiate like someone who has nothing left to lose tonight. She sat back down. Are we clear? We're clear, he said. And then quietly, like it cost him something real. You would have terrified your grandfather. She didn't let that land. Not yet. There wasn't room for it yet. Tell me the plan. Marco spread the intercepted message on the desk between them, and for the next 20 minutes they built something from the wreckage of the night. Elena listened. She asked precise questions, times, numbers, names, points of access, and she watched Marco's expression shift incrementally from the polite wariness he'd walked in with to something that looked closer to respect. Domenico mostly listened, too interjecting where the plan required his authority, and otherwise watching Elena with an expression she couldn't fully decode, and had decided not to try to decode until her mother was in the same room and breathing. It was near midnight when Marco folded the paper back into his jacket and said he needed an hour to set 3 things in motion. He looked at Elena before he left. For what it's worth it, he said. The day you interviewed for this job, I told Domenico it was a bad idea, too complicated. Too many moving parts. A pause. I was wrong about the complicated part. He said it like a man who doesn't say he's wrong often and means it every time he does. He left. Elena and Domenico sat in the quiet that followed. Marco, Elena said after a moment. His last name? Reyes, Domenico said. Same as mine. Your mother's maiden name. He looked at the photograph on the desk. Marco is her brother's son. Your cousin. He came to work for me 6 years ago when he was 24. A beat. He didn't know about you either. Not until I hired you. Elena processed that. A cousin she'd been working alongside for 11 months, barely knowing his name. A family that had been in the same building with her, separated by locked doors and withheld truths the whole time. Is there anyone else? She asked. Anyone else in this house I'm related to without knowing it? The corner of his mouth moved not quite a smile, but the suggestion of one. the first she'd seen from him. No, just Marco. Good, I'm not sure I can handle another one tonight. He looked at her for a moment. Something in his face opened just slightly, the way a door opens when the lock is very old and very tired, and someone has finally stopped fighting it. You're handling tonight considerably better than I expected. What did you expect? Tears, accusations, the kind of reaction that requires more time than we have. I'll save it, she said. I'll have a complete breakdown sometime next week when my mother is back and I'm not needed to be functional. She held his gaze. But right now I need to ask you something. And I need you to answer me honestly, even if you think the honest answer is the wrong one. Ask. The man with the camera, the one outside my mother's building. She leaned forward slightly. You said Raphael's people found her 3 weeks ago, but Marco just said she's been in your safe location for 8 days. That means there were 2 weeks in between where you knew she was being watched and you didn't move her yet. A pause. Why? Domenico was quiet for 3 full seconds. Because moving her was the signal, he said. The moment I pulled her out of that apartment, Raphael would know I knew, and he'd accelerate. I needed him to believe he still had time. He looked at her evenly. I made a calculation. You used her as bait, to buy time. I kept her under constant surveillance for 14 days, 3 of my people on 8-hour rotations. She was never unwatched. But she didn't know, Elena said. She was sitting in her apartment, going about her life, not knowing she was being watched by Raphael's man and protected by yours, and you decided that was acceptable because of a calculation. Yes. Did it work? We learned more about Raphael's network in those 14 days than we had in the previous 6 months. A beat. So yes, it worked. Elena looked at him. You're going to have a very hard time, she said slowly, convincing me that you're different from the thing you protected us from. Just so you know, that's going to take more than one night. I'm aware, he said, and he said it like a man who accepts a debt rather than disputes it. I'm not asking you to decide tonight who I am to you. I'm asking you to get through tonight. Everything else can wait. Before she could answer, Marco's voice came through the door, sharp, no preamble. We have a problem. Both of them stood. Marco came back into the room and his face had changed completely in the 40 minutes since he'd left. The controlled calculation was still there, but underneath it was something raw and immediate. The safe house, he said. He stopped, started again. One of the 3 people I called to verify the location, he didn't answer. I sent someone to check. He looked at Domenico. The location is clean. Your mother is not there. The floor disappeared under Elena's feet. She was moved, Marco said. Someone moved her before Raphael's people could have gotten to her. The question is, he set another piece of paper on the desk. A photograph, this time printed grainy. Someone left this. Elena looked at the photograph. It was a picture of her, taken from outside the mansion on Valoro Drive, standing at the 3rd floor window. Tonight, within the last 2 hours, her own face looking down at a street she hadn't known anyone was watching from. And written on the back of the photograph in handwriting she didn't recognize were 4 words that rearranged every calculation they'd made in the past hour. She came to me. Elena turned the photograph over and read it again. Then she looked up at Domenico, then at Marco. What does that mean, she said. What does she came to me mean? Marco's jaw was tight. It means your mother wasn't taken, Elena. He looked at her steadily with the expression of someone delivering the kind of information that changes the shape of everything that came before it. It means she went willingly. She went willingly. Those 3 words sat in the center of Elena's chest like a stone dropped into still water, sending cracks outward in every direction. Her mother, Carmen Reyes, the woman who had raised her in a 2-bedroom apartment on double shifts and recycled leftovers, and the particular brand of fierce, quiet love that doesn't announce itself, that woman had walked out of Domenico's safe house on her own 2 feet and gone to Raphael Mora. No, Elena said. The word came out before thought caught up to it. No, you're misreading it. Someone's forcing her to say that someone made her. The note is in her handwriting, Marco said. He said it gently, which somehow made it worse. I had it compared against records from her rental application 3 years ago. It's hers. Elena looked at the 4 words again. She came to me. written in her mother's careful, slightly leftward script, the same handwriting that had signed her school permission slips and her birthday cards, and the note she'd left on Elena's pillow the morning she started her first real job at 19. I'm so proud of you, mija. Be good. Be smart. Be safe. Why? Elena's voice came out hollow. Why would she go to him? Domenico, who had been standing very still since Marco came back into the room, said, because she knows something we don't. Everyone looked at him. Carmen didn't survive 27 years of carrying my secrets by being careless, he said. His voice was controlled, but underneath it was something that Elena was starting to recognize as the particular register he used when something had genuinely surprised him, which she was learning didn't happen often. She doesn't make impulsive decisions. She never has. He looked at the photograph of Elena taken from the street outside her own face, staring back at her from a piece of paper that should not exist. She went to Raphael deliberately, which means she either found out something that made her believe she could negotiate something from inside his reach. He paused. Or she went there to protect someone. Me, Elena said immediately. Ute, he agreed. The room shifted. Something realigned in Elena's understanding of the last hour, the way a room looks different once you find the light switch. Same furniture, same walls, but suddenly visible in a completely different way. Her mother had been in Domenico's safe house for 8 days. 8 days of knowing that Raphael's people had been watching her apartment. 8 days of being protected and informed and kept in the careful dark of someone else's operational plan. And then Elena had walked into this house, into this study, into this entire situation, and somehow Carmen had found out. Somehow she'd known. She knew I was here, Elena said. She found out I was in this house tonight, and she moved to protect me before anyone asked her to. She looked at Domenico. How would she know? Domenico and Marco exchanged a look that lasted less than a second, but carried something large inside it. Who else knew I was working here? Elena's voice sharpened. Besides the two of you, who else in your organization knew who I was? Silence. Someone told her, Elena said. Someone in this house, someone you trust, sent her a message tonight and told her what was happening. And she went to Raphael because she thought, her throat tightened. She thought she could trade herself for me. Elena, am I wrong? Marco set both hands flat on the desk. He looked like a man choosing between two difficult truths and picking the one he could live with. We don't know yet, but it's the most likely read. Then we need to get her out, tonight. Whatever the plan was an hour ago, it needs to move faster. Moving faster without complete information is how people get killed, Domenico said. Not moving fast enough is how my mother gets killed, Elena shot back. So tell me what we know about Raphael's location. Tell me where he would take her. Tell me something useful, because I am done sitting in this room while Lucia. The name came from Marco, quiet and flat like a door closing. Elena stopped. Who is Lucia? Marco looked at Domenico with an expression that said he hadn't planned to say that name tonight and wasn't entirely sure he was glad he had. Domenico looked back at him with an expression that said the same thing back. Lucia Vasquez, Domenico said finally. She runs the household, scheduling staff, day-to-day operations. He paused. She has worked for me for 19 years. And she was also the one person outside of Marco and myself who knew your full identity when we brought you on. He said it carefully, the way you say something that has weight. I trusted her with it because I needed her to ensure certain protections were in place without explaining the full reason. You trusted her, Elena said. I trusted her, he repeated, with 19 years of evidence behind that trust. 19 years, and tonight she burned it, Marco said quietly. He didn't say it with satisfaction. He said it the way you say something that hurts exactly as much as you expected it to hurt, which is its own specific kind of awful. You're sure? Domenico asked. She's not in the building, Marco said. I checked 20 minutes ago when I was running down the contact chain. Her room is empty and her car is gone. She left sometime in the last 2 hours. He let that settle. Same window as Carmen's movement. Domenico said nothing for a long moment. Elena watched his face and saw something she hadn't seen there yet, not anger exactly, something older and quieter. The specific expression of a man confronting the cost of having trusted something that turned out to be hollow. She recognized it. She'd worn it most of tonight. All right, he said, and then again quieter. All right. He straightened. The moment passed. The calculation came back online behind his eyes. Raphael now has Carmen, Lucia, and a photograph of Elena taken from outside this house. What he doesn't have is the ledger, and he doesn't have Elena herself. He looked at his daughter. Everything depends on keeping that second part true. I'm not hiding, Elena said immediately. I'm not asking you to hide. I'm asking you to be strategic about where you are and when. His voice was firm but not unkind. You are not trained for this. You have never operated in this kind of situation. You are smart and you are capable, and tonight you have shown me exactly what kind of person you are. But smart and capable people die when they move without information in environments like this. I will not have that happen. What happened to every person in this being a choice, Elena said. It is a choice. I'm asking you to choose correctly. She looked at him, hard, for a long moment. Tell me about Raphael, she said. The history, not 28 years ago. Right now, tonight, tell me who he is and how he thinks. If I'm going to be useful, I need to understand him. Domenico pulled a chair to the desk and sat. When he spoke again, his voice was different, stripped of the careful layering he'd been using all evening, and down to something raw. The voice of a man talking about someone he understood the way you only understand a person who has betrayed you from close range. Raphael is methodical, he said. He doesn't make moves he hasn't already built an exit from. He's had this in motion for months, possibly longer. The surveillance on your mother's building wasn't an opening gambit, it was a confirmation. He'd already worked out most of the board before he showed his hand. He paused. He also doesn't hurt people unnecessarily, not because he has scruples, but because mess is inefficient and he despises inefficiency. Your mother is safer with him than she would be with someone cruder. He needs her functional. For how long, Elena asked? Until he gets the ledger or loses the belief that it's coming. He met her eyes, which means our window is not small, but it is not unlimited. Where does he operate from? He moves. He learned that from me. Never stay in one location long enough for it to become a liability. Domenico's expression shifted slightly. But there are places he returns to, patterns he can't fully break because they're built into his operations. Warehousing near the port, a legitimate restaurant front in East Side he's used for 20 years because the owner owes him a debt that never expires. He looked at Marco. The restaurant. Marco was already on his phone. He said 3 words into it, listen, said 2 more, ended the call. I have someone 2 blocks out, he said. They're watching now. Elena looked at the photograph on the desk. Her own face, the street outside. Someone had been there close enough to capture that image clearly while she'd stood at a window 3 floors up and not known. The person who took this photograph, she said, they were watching the house. Watching for me specifically. Yes, Domenico said, which means Raphael knew I was in this building before Lucia told him. The room went still. Marco lowered his phone slowly. He already knew, Elena said. Lucia wasn't the tip-off, she was the confirmation. She looked at Domenico. He's had someone watching this house, someone close enough to identify me by face and connect me to you. A beat. How? Domenico's jaw tightened. The interview, he said, 11 months ago, someone who processed your application before it came to Mrs. Ruiz. He said it with a kind of controlled precision that told Elena he was already running backward through 11 months of access points, looking for the exact door that had been left ajar. I was careful, but careful isn't perfect. So he's known for nearly a year that you have a daughter inside your house, Elena said. And he waited. He waited because the ledger wasn't yet at the place he needed it to be to make his move worth making, Domenico said. Raphael thinks in years, not months. He was watching all of us, me, you, your mother, and building the moment when every piece was where he needed it. And something accelerated it. Something changed his timeline in the last 3 weeks. Yes, Domenico paused. The ledger changed hands. Internally, a transfer I made for legitimate reasons to secure it further. But the movement was visible to someone with the right access. His voice tightened. It signaled to Raphael that I was repositioning. He interpreted it as a sign that I was preparing to use it. Were you, a pause. Not immediately, but soon, yes. So he moved first. He moved first. Elena pressed her fingers to her temples, not from frustration, from the intense, focused effort of holding all of it together at once. All the threads, all the timing, all the moving pieces of a game she'd been dropped into mid-play without a board to look at. She thought about her mother sitting in a room somewhere with a man who had calculated everything down to the week. She thought about Carmen walking out of a safe house on purpose, carrying whatever she knew going toward a man she hadn't seen in 27 years, because she'd decided it was the way to keep her daughter safe. And Elena thought that is exactly what I would have done. The realization landed with a strange, aching warmth in the middle of all the cold. I need to talk to her, Elena said. Can you get me a line to wherever he's holding her? Is there any channel of Bucketom? If we contact her, we confirm to Raphael that we know where she is, Marco said. He'll move her immediately. Then what? Marco's phone rang. He looked at it, answered, listened for approximately 12 seconds without speaking, said copy, and ended the call. The restaurant, he said. My man just picked up a vehicle outside. Plates match one of Raphael's secondary fleet cars. He looked at Domenico. She's there. Elena was on her feet before she'd made a conscious decision. Sit down, Domenico and Marco said simultaneously. I am not Elena. Domenico's voice using her name the way he'd used it when she'd been spinning out in this same room two hours ago. Precise, not harsh, like a hand on a shoulder. You walking to that restaurant accomplishes nothing except handing Raphael exactly what he wants. Think. She stood there, jaw tight, hands at her sides, and she made herself think. Raphael had Carmen. He had Lucia, who had 19 years of Domenico's operational knowledge in her head. He had a photograph of Elena and the knowledge that she was Domenico's daughter. What he did not have was the ledger. What he did not have was Elena herself. What he did not have, and this was the thing that was starting to take shape in Elena's mind with the slow, clear certainty of something that had been there all along, was any idea that Carmen had gone to him on purpose. He thought Carmen was leverage. He thought she'd maneuvered a frightened woman into his reach. He had no idea that Carmen Reyes had spent 27 years being underestimated by people who mistook quietness for weakness. She's not a hostage, Elena said slowly. She walked in there with something. She went to him because she has something he needs or something he doesn't know she knows. She looked at Domenico. My mother knows something about Raphael, something she's been sitting on. What is it? Domenico looked at her for a long moment. There was a woman, he said carefully, before all of this, for your mother and I before any of it, a woman who mattered a great deal to Raphael. He paused. She disappeared. 29 years ago, Raphael told everyone she'd left the city, left him, moved on. His jaw tightened slightly. She didn't leave, and your mother was the only person outside of Raphael who knew that. The room held its breath. Where did she go? Elena said. She died, Domenico said flatly. Under circumstances that were never examined properly because Raphael made sure they weren't. Her name was Ana Cortez. She was 23 years old. He looked at the desk. Your mother witnessed the argument that preceded it. She was in a quarter she wasn't supposed to be in, and she heard things she was never supposed to hear. A beat. She came to me the next day and told me everything. That was actually the night he stopped. The night you fell in love with her, Elena said quietly. He didn't confirm it out loud. He didn't need to. She's been carrying that for 27 years, Elena said. A witness to something Raphael would destroy everything to keep buried. She looked at Domenico, and she walked into his space, and she's sitting across from him right now with that inside her chest. Which makes her either the most dangerous person in that room, Marco said, or the most vulnerable. Both, Elena said. She's both. She moved to the desk standing across from her father. She went in there to make a deal. She's going to offer him silence, her continued silence, all these years of it formalized in exchange for being left alone. Her and me. She paused. She doesn't know we have the ledger. She doesn't know how close Domenico already was to moving. She went in there with the only card she thought she had. And if Raphael decides her continued silence is less reliable than her permanent silence, Marco didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Then we stop waiting, Elena said. Right now, whatever the plan is, we accelerate it. We use what Raphael doesn't know we use me. She looked at Domenico squarely. You said I know this house. I know schedules and faces and access points. But what I also know is that I have something to offer Raphael that has nothing to do with the ledger. What? Marco said. I'm Domenico's daughter, she said. The one person he would trade the ledger for. She held up a hand before either of them could speak. I'm not saying I hand myself over. I'm saying we offer a meeting, controlled on terms we set. I come to the table as myself as his daughter, and we negotiate with Raphael face to face. He gets what he thinks he wants, which is leverage. What he doesn't know is that the moment I'm in that room, I can confirm my mother's status, buy time, and give Marco's people a window to position. No, Domenico said, immediately and absolutely. You said I had a choice. I said you had a choice about helping. I did not say you had a choice about walking into Raphael Mora's reach. Then you lied about the choice, Apostle. The word hit the room sharp and clean. Domenico went very still. She's right, Marco said quietly. Both men looked at him. He seemed mildly surprised himself. The logic holds. Raphael wants the ledger and he wants leverage. We can't give him the ledger. But if Elena reaches out directly, if she contacts him herself without our involvement, as if she's acting against Domenico. He looked at Elena. Can you make him believe you're not on his side? I've been making powerful men think I'm harmless for 11 months, Elena said. Yes, I can make him believe that. Domenico looked at his daughter for a long moment. She watched him work through it, the calculation, the risk, the odds. The thing underneath all of it that wasn't calculation at all, and that she was only beginning to put a name to. If anything goes wrong, he said finally. Things are already wrong, she said. My mother is sitting in a room with the man who killed someone and buried it, and she's trying to negotiate herself out of it with a 27-year-old secret and no backup. She paused. She went in alone because she thought I was the thing most worth protecting. I'm not going to let that be wasted. Silence. Then Domenico said, very quietly, you sound like her. Good, Elena said. Then maybe Raphael will underestimate me for the same reasons he underestimated her. She looked at Marco. Make the contact. Do it through a channel he'll believe I could have found independently. Make it look like I went looking for him, not the other way around. Marco looked at Domenico. Domenico looked at Elena. And then he did something she hadn't seen from him all night. He exhaled. Not a sigh, not resignation. Something closer to the breath of a man who has been braced for a blow and finally decided to lean into it instead. Do it, he said to Marco. Marco pulled out his phone. Elena looked down at the photograph of herself on the desk. Her own face caught without her knowledge on a night that had rearranged everything she thought she knew about her own life. She picked it up, looked at it for one more second, then she set it face down and didn't look at it again. Whatever came next was going to require all of her eyes facing forward. Marco made the contact at 12:47 in the morning. He used a burner channel, something deliberately traceable to Elena, if Raphael's people were thorough enough, which they were, which was the point. The message was short, 8 words. I know what my father has. Let's talk. No signature, no number attached. Just the message dropped into a frequency Raphael's network monitored, timed to arrive like something impulsive. Like a young woman who had just discovered her entire life was a controlled arrangement and had decided to blow the whole thing up. They waited 9 minutes. Raphael responded in 4 words. Tomorrow, noon, come alone. Elena looked at the response on Marco's screen and felt something cold and clarifying move through her chest. Not fear. Something beyond fear on the other side of it. The particular steadiness that arrives when the decision has been made and the body finally stops fighting the mind about it. He answered too fast, she said. Yes, Marco said. He was already waiting for contact from this direction. Yes, which means he always intended to use me as the endgame, not just my mother. She looked at Domenico. He knew you'd never hand over the ledger for Carmen alone. He needed me in the room too. He needs both of you, Domenico said. His voice was steady, but his eyes were doing something Elena had learned to watch for, that almost invisible internal recalculation, the mind behind the face running numbers at speed. He's going to try to put you and your mother in the same room and use you against each other. Against me. Then we make sure that room works for us instead of him. Elena looked at Marco. Noon gives us 11 hours. What can we do in 11 hours? What they could do, it turned out, was considerable. Marco worked the phone for 2 hours straight while Domenico and Elena sat across from each other in the study and did something neither of them had done, yet talked. Not about Raphael or the ledger or the plan taking shape in the next room. About Carmen, about the years in between. Domenico asked questions carefully like a man who knows he has no right to the answers and is asking anyway, and Elena answered them with the same bluntness she'd been using all night because she had found that honesty was the only currency that worked in this room. She told him about the laundromat, about the way her mother's hands looked after a double shift, red and cracked at the knuckles, and how Carmen would run them under cold water at the sink and never once complain. She told him about the apartment, about the single window in her childhood bedroom that faced a brick wall, about the way Carmen had hung a painting of the ocean above it so that Elena would have something worth looking at. She told him about the night she'd gotten the call from the hospital, Carmen's first episode 3 years ago, and how she'd sat in a waiting room for 6 hours alone because there was no one else to call, and how the loneliness of that had been the specific particular kind that comes from needing a parent and not having one to reach for. She didn't say it to wound him. She said it because it was true and because he had asked and because she had decided somewhere in the last 3 hours that the only way through this night was complete honesty, even when it cost something. Domenico listened to every word without interrupting, and when she finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I would have been there." "I know," she said. "That's the part I'm still working out how to feel about." At 3 in the morning, Marco came back in with a plan that was either going to work or wasn't, and the difference between those two outcomes was almost entirely dependent on Rafael Mora doing what intelligent men who believe they've already won consistently do, which was underestimate the board. The meeting was set for noon at a location Rafael had specified, a private room above the restaurant in Yes side, neutral looking, controlled on his end, or so he believed. What he did not know was that Marco had 2 people inside that building, already not planted tonight, but in place for months as part of an entirely separate operation that had nothing to do with any of this and had the particular gift of being invisible, precisely because it predated the current crisis by long enough to seem unconnected. What he also did not know was that Domenico intended to be in that building. "You can't," Elena said immediately when Domenico told her. "If he sees you, he won't see me." He said it with the quiet certainty of a man who had spent 30 years being in rooms without being seen. "I will be there, and I will not be visible. That's a distinction I've maintained my entire career. And if it goes wrong, if he knows, then the situation changes and we adapt." He looked at her directly. "But I'm not sending you into that room alone. That is not a negotiation, Elena. That is the one thing I am telling you is not on the table." She looked at him for a long moment. "Okay," she said. He blinked. He'd been braced for a fight. She could see it, the slight recalibration when the argument he'd prepared for didn't come. "Okay," he repeated. "You're her father," she said. "You've been making unilateral decisions about her safety for 27 years, and most of them were wrong, but the instinct underneath them wasn't." She paused. "Don't make me regret saying that." Something moved across his face, raw and unguarded and gone in a second, but she'd seen it. She was getting better at catching those moments, the ones he didn't mean to show. "Get some sleep," he said gruffly. "You have 5 hours." She didn't sleep. She didn't imagine he did either. At 7 in the morning, Domenico's phone rang and he answered it and listened for 45 seconds without speaking. And when he lowered the phone, his face had changed in a way that made Elena's stomach drop before he said a word. "Lucia," he said, "she's reached out. From inside Raphael's location. From a number we don't recognize. But the message is authenticated. She used a phrase only she and I knew." He looked at the phone. "She says Carmen is safe. She says Raphael hasn't made a move against her yet." A pause. "She also says she's sorry." "Sorry," Elena repeated flatly. "Those are her words." "Does sorry come with an explanation?" He set the phone on the desk. "Lucia's daughter has been in Raphael's debt for 4 years. A situation Lucia kept from me because she knew what I would have done about it, or more accurately, what I wouldn't have done, which was pay it." He said it with the kind of even stripped-down honesty that hurts more than anger. "Raphael found the daughter 2 months ago and used her to turn Lucia. He paused. Lucia believes if she cooperates fully, and this resolves cleanly, Raphael will release her daughter from the debt. He won't, Marco said from the doorway. No. Domenico agreed. He won't. Elena stood up. Can we use this Lucia's inside? She has access. She's sending us something, Domenico said. He looked at the phone again as it buzzed. He opened what had arrived. His face went very still. What is it? Elena said. He turned the phone and showed her a photograph. Her mother sitting at a table alive and visibly unhurt, holding today's newspaper. The way you prove to someone that a person is alive and the photo is current. And next to her mother at the table, barely in frame, was the edge of a chair and a hand resting on the table. A man's hand. And on the wrist visible just at the edge of the image, a watch, distinctive, silver with a dark face. Raphael, Domenico said. He's with her right now, Elena said. In that room. He sat down with her, Marco said. He's not leaving her with staff. He's doing this personally. He looked at Domenico. That means it matters to him more than the ledger. She told him something. She's already moved whatever card she had. Or she hasn't used it yet and he's watching her to figure out what she knows before he decides what she's worth. Elena looked at the photograph, her mother's face careful and composed, the newspaper held steady in hands that were not shaking. That stillness. That practiced 27-year stillness. She's stalling, Elena said with absolute certainty. She sat down across from him, and she's barely been talking for however many hours, and she is deliberately not giving him the thing he came for because she is buying time. She looked at Domenico. She knows we're coming. She can't know that, Marco said. She knows her daughter, Elena said. She knows I found out about this house tonight. She knows I'm not going to sit in a room and wait. She looked at the photograph one more time and then set the phone down. We moved the meeting. Don't wait for noon. Elena. He has her in that room right now and she's holding him off with 27-year-old information in a newspaper and whatever nerve she has left after 8 days of this. Her voice stayed level, but underneath it was everything. All the fear she hadn't let herself feel all night. All the love that had no clean way to come out. All the years of her mother standing at a sink with cracked hands and a painting of the ocean on a wall. We move now. We don't give him more time with her. Marco, can your people be ready in an hour? Marco looked at Domenico. Domenico said, can they? 90 minutes, Marco said. Give me 90 minutes. You have 60 by him, Elena said. He left without arguing. Domenico looked at Elena across the desk and something passed between them. Not words, not yet, but something that occupied the space where words were still being assembled. He picked up the silver frame from the desk. The photograph of Carmen laughing. He looked at it for a moment, and then he held it out to Elena. She took it. Keep it, he said. I've had it long enough. She held it against her chest the same way she'd held it hours ago when she'd first picked it up from the shelf, except now it meant something completely different. Now she knew the laugh. Now she understood the man looking at her mother like she was irreplaceable. Now the photograph was not a mystery, but a history, and she was standing at the far end of it. When this is over, she said, you need to tell her you're sorry, not for protecting her, for deciding you knew better than she did what she could handle. She paused. She deserved the choice. I know, he said. Tell her, not me. I will. They moved out of the mansion at 8:05 in the morning. Elena in the back of a car that looked like nothing and moved like everything. Domenico in a separate vehicle ahead by 4 minutes, taking a different route, because that was how this had to work him in place before she arrived, invisible in the building, in a way that would take Raphael too long to locate, even if he swept the floor. Marco was already there. Elena rode in silence. The driver didn't speak, which she was grateful for because she needed the quiet to run through it one more time. Not the plan, she knew the plan. She needed to run through herself, who she was walking into that room as, what she knew, what she was willing to say, what she was absolutely not going to do regardless of what Raphael put in front of her. She thought about her mother sitting across from a man who had covered up a murder for 29 years and was now weighing Carmen's continued silence against the efficiency of her permanent one. She thought about how Carmen had done that alone, had decided alone, had walked in, alone, had sat there alone for hours with nothing but her nerve and her knowledge and the particular stubbornness of a woman who had survived 27 years of loving a man she'd made herself stop loving. Elena Reyes was her mother's daughter. She walked into the restaurant at 9:15 in the morning, and the host at the front, who worked for Raphael, she clocked that immediately from the way his eyes moved to a phone on the counter. Before he looked at her, face told her she was expected and showed her to the stairs. The room above was smaller than she'd imagined. A table, 4 chairs, a window she didn't look at. And seated at the far end of the table, one hand flat on the surface, entirely still exactly like the photograph, was Rafael Mora. He was 61 years old and looked 50. Silver-haired, well-dressed, with the kind of face that had been handsome for so long it had calcified into a mask of it. His eyes were very dark and very direct, and they assessed her in the first 2 seconds, with an efficiency that told her he was exactly as intelligent as Domenico had warned her he was. He did not stand. Elena Castellano, he said, the name she'd never been called. He said it deliberately, watching for her reaction. Reyes, she said. Elena Reyes. She sat down across from him without being invited to. Where is my mother? She's comfortable. She's been our guest for... I didn't ask how she was being treated. I asked where she is. She held his gaze without blinking. I'd like to see her before we discuss anything else. That's not how this works. I know how you'd like it to work. I'm telling you how it's going to work. She put both hands on the table. Flat, open, nothing to hide. You contacted me because you want the ledger. I came here because I want my mother. Those are the 2 things in this room, and everything else is noise. So let's skip the noise. Something moved in his eyes, not anger, interest. The particular interest of a man encountering a variable he hadn't fully accounted for. You're very much like your father, he said. I've been told that twice in 12 hours. I'm starting to think it's meant to unsettle me. Is it working? No, she said. Show me my mother. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up a phone from the table, said 2 words into it, and a door she hadn't registered on the side wall opened, and Carmen Reyes walked through it. Elena was out of the chair before she'd made the decision to move. Her mother looked tired, deeply. Structurally tired, the kind that 8 days of low-grade sustained fear produces in a person, but she was upright and her eyes were clear, and the moment she saw Elena, she made a sound that wasn't a word, just a sound, and Elena crossed the room in 4 steps, and her arms went around her mother, and Carmen held on with the grip of someone who has been holding on alone for a very long time and is exhausted by the effort. I told you to stay away, Carmen whispered into Elena's hair. I know, Elena whispered back. I told you. I know, Mama, I know. She held on for 3 more seconds, exactly 3, because she could feel Raphael watching, and she could not afford to be just a frightened daughter in this room. She needed to be something else too. And 3 seconds was the amount of time she allowed herself to be purely, completely her mother's child before she straightened up and turned around. She's leaving with me, she said to Raphael. Today, now, as part of whatever arrangement we're about to make. Elena, Carmen's voice cautioning, I know what I'm doing, Mama. Sit down. She said it gently with a hand briefly on her mother's arm, and Carmen, who had not sat when men told her to sit for 27 years, sat down and looked at her daughter with an expression that was equal parts terror and something that looked dangerously close to pride. Raphael leaned back in his chair and studied Elena with undisguised calculation. The ledger, he said. That's what I want. Everything else is secondary. I know, Elena said, but you're not going to get it from me today. Then why are you here? Because I'm the person who can get it for you, she said, and I needed to establish that directly before we went any further. She held his gaze. Domenico doesn't know I'm here. He thinks I'm still in his house following his plan. But I have a different set of priorities than he does. She glanced at her mother, and I decided that acting on those priorities myself was more efficient than waiting for him to get around to it. You're betraying your father, Raphael said. He said it clinically like he was naming a chemical compound. I'm protecting my mother, she said. Those things look different depending on where you're standing. He looked at her for a long moment. What's your timeline? 48 hours. I can get you access to the ledger's location in 48 hours. In exchange, my mother leaves with me right now, today, and is not contacted again. You release whatever hold you have over Lucia Vasquez's daughter, and you walk away from every angle of this. She kept her voice level. Those are the terms. You're in no position to set terms. I'm in the exact position to set terms, she said quietly, because I'm the only person in this situation who can actually get you what you want without a war that costs everyone in this room more than the ledger is worth. She paused. You're 61 years old, Mr. Mora. Domenico is 57. This has been going on for 28 years. I'm 32 and I have no history with you, and I have no interest in continuing something that started before I was born. She looked at him steadily. I'm offering you the cleanest possible exit. Take it. The silence lasted 11 seconds. She counted. And then Rafael Mora said, 48 hours. And something in the room exhaled. My mother leaves now, Elena said. Your mother leaves now, he agreed. He stood slowly with the deliberate movement of a man who is giving nothing away faster than he chooses to. He looked at Carmen, and Elena watched her mother look back at him. 27 years of history in a single exchange of 4 seconds, and whatever passed between them was something Elena decided she would ask about later, when there was time, when they were somewhere else, when her mother's hands weren't gripping the arm of a chair with white knuckles. Raphael looked at Elena one more time. You'll hear from my people in 24 hours, he said, with specifics. I'll be available, she said. He left through a different door than he'd entered. 2 of his people went with him, and a third lingered by the side exit until Marco's voice came through a frequency somewhere in the building, and the third man suddenly had somewhere else to be. Elena turned to her mother. Carmen Reyes stood up from the chair, eager, and looked at her daughter with the full, unguarded weight of everything she'd been carrying since before Elena was born, and her face, that careful, contained face that had deflected so many questions over so many years, finally let go of the shape it had been holding. You lied to him, Carmen said. Her voice was very quiet. You don't have the ledger. No, Elena said. I don't. Then what? We have 48 hours, Elena said. And we have something Raphael doesn't know we have. She took her mother's hand. We have Domenico. Carmen went still at the name. He's in this building, Elena said. He's been here since before I arrived. She watched her mother's face. He's been protecting you for 27 years, Mama, in ways you didn't know about, and in ways that were wrong, and in ways that cost both of you things that can't be returned. But he's here right now in this building because he was not going to let you sit in that room alone. She held her mother's hand tighter. He wants to talk to you, and I think you've both waited long enough. Carmen's eyes filled. She blinked once. Controlled. The reflex of a woman who had trained herself out of easy tears by necessity. And then she looked at Elena. Really looked at her the way parents look at children when they see them become something they always hope for. And she said, when did you get so much older than me? About 12 hours ago, Elena said. Come on. Domenico was in a room 2 floors down alone, standing with his back to the door when they came in. He heard them and turned, and when he saw Carmen, the man who did not show his face to anyone, went completely helplessly still. Carmen looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, You kept our daughter safe. I tried to, he said. I made mistakes. Yes, she said. So did I. A pause. We can talk about that. I'd like that, he said. I'd like that very much. Elena stood in the doorway of that room and watched 2 people who had spent 27 years apart stand 6 feet from each other and begin slowly and perfectly, with all the damage of the years between them entirely visible and entirely unresolved, to close the distance. She stepped back, pulled the door almost closed, stood in the hallway with Marco, who handed her a cup of coffee from somewhere without a word, which was exactly the right thing to do. The ledger, she said quietly. What's the actual plan? We use the 48 hours to give it to the right people, Marco said. Federal level. People who've been building a case for 6 years and needed one more piece of evidence to make it airtight. He paused. The moment it's in their hands, Raphael's leverage disappears. He can't trade what's already been surrendered, and he can't move against any of us without bringing the whole thing down on himself. He'll know I played him. Yes, Marco said, but he'll be too busy to do anything about it. Elena looked at the closed door. Through it faintly, she could hear voices, her parents' voices, low and careful, and still finding their footing but talking. Actually talking in the same room for the first time in 27 years. My cousin, she said to Marco. He looked at her. You're my cousin, she said again, like she was trying the word on, seeing how it fit. Apparently, he said, You knew for 11 months. I did. And you said nothing. No. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Because it wasn't my thing to say. He paused. And because I wanted to see who you were first. He looked at her sideways. You're not bad. That's a low bar. In this family, it's actually not, he said. And Elena looked at the door and held her coffee with both hands and felt something settle in her chest that had been in motion since the moment she'd picked up a silver frame from a shelf in a locked room that wasn't supposed to be open. Not peace exactly, not resolution. Something more honest than both of those, the specific ground-level feeling of a person who has survived a thing and is still standing at the end of it, with more family than they started with, and more truth than they bargained for, and more road ahead than behind. 3 weeks later, Rafael Mora was indicted on 4 federal counts. The case had been building for 6 years. The ledger was the last piece. He was taken into custody on a Tuesday morning and did not make bail. Lucia Vasquez returned to the mansion on Valoro Drive 3 days after the indictment. She stood in Domenico's study with her hands folded and her chin up and her eyes red from what looked like several days of crying, and she said, I know there's nothing I can say. Domenico looked at her for a long moment and said, her daughter's debt is cleared. And then after a pause that cost him something visible, come back to work on Monday. It wasn't forgiveness, they both knew that. It was something more practical and in some ways more difficult. The decision to continue anyway. Carmen Reyes did not go back to South Glendale. She didn't go to the mansion either. She went to a small house in a neighborhood that was neither of those things, and Elena helped her move in on a Saturday, and Domenico arrived at 2 in the afternoon with Marco, and they all had coffee at a table that was just barely big enough for 4 people, and nobody talked about the past because there was too much of it and not enough time, and nobody talked about the future because it was still being built. They talked about ordinary things, the neighborhood, the coffee, whether the kitchen window let in enough light. It was uncomfortable and incomplete and real. Elena drove home that night to an apartment she could now afford because Domenico had made certain of it in the only way he knew how, which was quietly and without asking permission, and she had argued about it for 2 days and then accepted it because her mother's medication didn't negotiate, and she sat at her own kitchen table and held the silver frame. Her mother's face, laughing. A man beside her looking at her like she was something worth protecting. Elena set the frame on the table where she could see it. She had walked into a locked room looking for an open window, and she had found something she couldn't have named and hadn't known she was missing, and it was not simple, and it was not clean, and it came wrapped in 27 years of decisions that had cost everyone in the story something they didn't get back. But it was hers. All of it, the damage and the truth in the family assembled imperfectly from the wreckage of old choices. It was hers. And Elena Reyes, who had kept her head down for 11 months in a house full of locked doors, had learned what happened when you finally stopped looking at the floor. You found out who you were, and you stopped being afraid of it.